Welcome. It's great to see so many of you joining us. I am going to give it a minute to let people filter in. We have a full house, so to speak, tonight. I'm delighted to see how many people are joining us. We have about 500 right now, which seems like a great time to get started. My name is Linnea West. I work in public programs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and delighted that you are all joining us for In Conversation, Mary Cassatt and the Women's Vote. I'm joined by my colleague, Jenny Thompson.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Jenny is the Gloria and Jack Drosdick Curator of European Painting and Sculpture and Curator of the John G. Johnson Collection here. We are also joined by a guest speaker, Errin Haines.
Good evening, everybody.
And we're so delighted Errin is with us. Errin is an award-winning journalist and editor-at-large at The 19th. The 19th is a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom that reports on gender, politics, and policy. We also have with us Greg Stewart.
Hi, everyone.
Greg is a colleague in education, and he will be moderating the Q&A and also monitoring the chat. So he'll be behind the scenes for a bit of the program, and then he'll come back at the end. So thank you, Greg, in advance for that. So it feels important to be having this conversation now for a few reasons. One is that this year is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment declared that the right to vote in the United States could not be denied on the basis of sex. This was a huge victory for many people who had fought for suffrage. And while that victory remained incomplete for many women for many decades, the 19th Amendment is the single largest act of enfranchisement in the history of the United States. So tonight, we're going to think about that history through the lens of the artist Mary Cassatt. Jenny's going to start by sharing a little bit about Cassatt's work in the suffrage movement, and we can think together about how that advocacy might be related in her art. And of course, this isn't just history. The legacy of women's suffrage is with us today, and it's with us in a year where we have an important upcoming election. Errin Haines will speak about the significance of this centennial for women in the US and about the women's vote today. Finally, today is also National Voter Registration Day, so we're going to be sharing information about how to register to vote. It's a lot of great stuff to cover. Before we start, I do have a few notes of housekeeping. We'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for your questions. Please use the Q&A box to share your questions. That'll make sure that we see them. And there's also an upvote feature. So there's a thumbs up icon, and if you click it, it'll show that you like a question and want to hear it answered, and that question will go to the top of the queue. We also, of course, have the chat box, and Greg will be monitoring that as well, so we hope you use that, and we'd love to hear from you if you want to share where you're tuning in from. Closed captioning is available, and you can click the CC button to turn those on. Final note is that we're recording this program. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone after the program, so you will have a link to that recording, and you can look back at anything we talk about today. So all of that said, Jenny, I am delighted to hand this over to you and to hear a little more about Mary Cassatt and suffrage.
Thank you, Linnea. We don't often link Mary Cassatt with the suffrage movement. She was living in France in the years preceding the passage of the 19th Amendment, and it was a period in her life in which she was less active as a painter. She was, for instance, 66 and coping with a number of health issues in 1910, when we start to see suffrage becoming a regular theme in her correspondence. And she would use her correspondence, particularly with her American friends, to encourage women to support support suffrage. As she urged one friend right on the eve of World War I, work for the suffrage. If the world is to be saved, it will be the women who save it. And indeed, one of the friends that took up this call was Louisine Havemeyer. Havemeyer was a New York art collector, a society figure, the widow of H.O. Havemeyer, who had been a chairman of a sugar refinery company that we know today as Domino Sugar. But Louisine Havemeyer marched in suffrage parades down Fifth Avenue. She gave speeches across New York State. You see her on the screen carrying the suffrage torch at one of those speeches. And in February of 1919, she was arrested and jailed for attempting to burn an effigy of President Woodrow Wilson in front of the White House. She would spend a night in jail because she refused to pay the $5 fine to get her out of jail. And this would cause Cassatt to confess to another mutual friend that she was all for suffrage, but she didn't quite intend for Louisine Havemeyer to take this quite so far. But Havemeyer and Cassatt would work together on a 1915 exhibition that would raise money for suffrage. It was an exhibition that brought together 19 paintings and pastels by Cassatt, alongside 40 works by Edgar Duga, Rembrandt, Rubens, Vermeer, and a number of other Old Master painters. And on the screen here, you're seeing an exhibition view. On the left side of the door are works by Cassatt, and on the right side are works by Degas. The exhibition was a critical and financial success. They raised over $1,000 on the first night. That was equivalent of about $30,000 today. And it really fulfilled Cassatt's lifetime ambition to be seen as the equal of any male painter, and to show her as being both classic and modern at the same time. In this exhibition, Cassatt didn't paint anything new. She actually, Havemeyer urged her to search through her closet for paintings she might have forgotten about, and she relied quite heavily on loans from the Havemeyer collection and from a number of private collectors in America. And to a large degree, the selection of paintings in the exhibition was immaterial, since Cassatt had spent her life painting women, showing particular sensitivity to their work, to their intellectual interest, to their emotional lives. And so I'd like to spend just a few minutes walking you through some of Cassatt's paintings and showing the way that she wove this interest in women's lives into her works. I'll start with this one, quite well known, I hope, to those of you from Philadelphia. This is a painting that Cassatt I had hoped to have for the exhibition. She was unable to get it because at the time of the exhibition, it belonged to her sister-in-law, Lois Cassatt. Lois was an anti-suffragette. She did not believe in the suffrage movement. She refused to lend the painting, and she even boycotted the exhibition in New York and encouraged her friends to do so. As you might imagine, this was the subject of a family rift, and Cassatt made sure that her sister-in-law didn't get another one of her paintings after this. But this is a painting that you could see would be very fitting for a suffrage exhibition, because we have a female protagonist, quite literally at the reins here. The driver of this carriage is Cassatt's elder sister, Lydia, who lived with her in Paris at this stage. And the little girl with them is one of Edgar Degas' nieces. We don't know the name of the groom, the rather bored, maybe desultory looking groom on the back. He's a somewhat rare example of a male figure in Cassatt's work. She once said that there were enough pictures of men in the world that she didn't need to add men into her pictures, and that women didn't need to be defined by men in her paintings. And indeed, I think we can be struck in this painting by the confidence, the competence, and the calmness of Lydia as a driver of the carriage. It's one of the rare examples that I know of a painting of a woman driving a carriage at this date. And interestingly, it's very much part of the lived experience of the Cassatt sisters. Sorry about that. The Cassatt family owned a carriage. Both sisters were very skilled horsewomen. And we know from an account a letter actually written in 1877 by May Alcott, the sister of the novelist Louisa May Alcott, who May Alcott wrote of an evening that she'd spent with the Cassatt sisters, in which they had spontaneously decided around 10 a.m. that they would take the carriage out, drive across the Bois de Boulogne to get ices. And this is an example of how women in this age, in their sort of late 20s, early 30s, could enjoy a degree of autonomy in Paris at the time. And so it's fitting that Cassatt would make that the subject of one of her major pictures. At first glance, you might be surprised to see this picture as depicting an equally assured, independent woman. She seems to be the epitome of propriety, of social expectations at the time. She's in a beautiful pink evening gown, wearing a pearl necklace, holding a fan. And she's at the theater where we're seeing her surrounded by other theater boxes, by crowds there. And of course, going to the theater then, as now, was as much about watching the performance as about being seen. And Cassatt has cleverly placed her young, this young figure against a mirror. So she's seated in a loge, she's looking out to the theater, and behind her is a mirror that's reflecting the crowds around her. So this gives us an opportunity to see her within the context of the theater, but we're not, she's not mediated by any other figures around her. So we don't see sort of a male companion or a sister or a female companion with her. Instead, we're invited simply to focus on her experience. She's flushed, perhaps from the lights. Her lips are parted as if she's about to engage someone in conversation. And instead, it seems to be a work about the experience of being in the theater, both of being looked upon by other members of the audience, but also doing the looking and turning outward. And so it's a nice opportunity to focus, in Cassatt's view, on the experience of women out in society, out at the theater. But of course, as a female artist in the late 19th century, Cassatt had faced a number of restrictions on where she could paint, where it was subjects that were appropriate for her. And she spent a great deal of her time painting women at home. It gave her the opportunity, perhaps, to depict them as themselves without having to perform in public. And so in this painting, I think this is another work that I suspect she wanted for that 1915 exhibition, but couldn't get because Lois Cassatt wouldn't lend it to her. But she shows her mother reading Le Figaro, a daily newspaper that was popular in Paris. She's gone out of the way to show the masthead of the paper and to really show us how firmly her mother is gripping this paper. She's wrinkling it. She's not concerned about the next reader of the paper. There's a mirror that appears in the left background of the painting, which doubly reinforces her mother's firm grip on the paper. At the time, women were not encouraged to read the newspapers. They were seen as being a world of politics, a world of business, in short, a world of men. And in paintings at this moment, we will more often see women reading novels or looking at a magazine. But by having her mother hold this newspaper so firmly, Cassatt is making a statement about women's roles in the world. She's making a statement about her mother being a well-educated woman who was interested in politics. She was interested in the world. She was interested in horse racing. And so in making a picture about her mother wearing spectacles and just pursuing a sort of daily, sort of immersing herself in the outside world, Cassatt is reinforcing the kind of intellectual qualities and the intellectual role that women played at the time. And I'll just add as a final note that the year that this painting was created was the year that Paris hosted the International Women's Congress, which was a place where women's organizations from 11 countries came together to discuss issues such as suffrage, such as women's right to initiate divorces from their husbands, their right to equal pay, and concerns with education. These topics were all covered in the Figaro at the time, and so I'd like to think that we're actually seeing Cassatt's mother immerse herself in many of these women's issues. One of the other concerns of the Women's Congress was the care of children. It was a moment in which infant mortality rates were quite high. Bathing children was seen as one way of reducing disease, and parents were being encouraged to form strong bonds with their children in this age. And although Cassatt never married or had children, she painted scenes of mothers with their children regularly, and always showed them deeply engaged in their children and in the activity. Here you see the mother with her hand sort of wetting a cloth in a basin, but her entire sort of focus is on kind of cajoling this very sleepy, less than enthusiastic child into a bath. And I think Cassatt has kind of reinforced the mother's focus on this scene by using a cropped view and really looking downward too, so that we're really focused in on the child, but also on the way that the mother is engaged in the subject. And we might see this as yet another way in which Cassatt is exploring different aspects of women's lives. And if we think back to some of the other paintings I showed you, she engaged in a very broad campaign to show women's lives, both inside and outside the home, and to show them engaged in work, in pleasure, in all ways. Both in her painting and in her works towards suffrage, Cassatt sort of continually reinforced throughout her career her personal determination that women should be someone and not something. I'll stop there and take questions or pause.
Jenny, thank you. That's great. I think for me, one of the things that's so very helpful is how all of your discussion reminds us that in the moment they were painted, these were quite radical depictions of women. They were independent women. You know, when I see a woman reading a newspaper, I don't automatically think of that. So that's great. We will save questions to the end for the sake of time. And I'm excited to transition to our next speaker, Errin. Errin, as I mentioned, of course, is an editor-at-large at the 19th, named for the 19th Amendment. And one of the things the 19th mission statement says is it refers to the 19th Amendment as unfinished business. So, Errin, I know you're going to talk about many things. I'm excited to hear about that and everything else.
Well, thank you, Linnea. And Jenny, that was just such a fascinating conversation. And just to really be thinking about the intersectionality of suffrage and art and what it means for our politics today is really a timely conversation, and frankly, a lot of the themes that you hit on in your conversation are values that we have at the 19th around equality, around women as being full participants in this democracy, you know, being civically engaged and aware, and also, like I said, that kind of the intersectionality of some of the things that you mentioned, and also just some of the issues that women were contending with and frankly continue to contend with, you know, even all these years after, you know, we see the images in those paintings. And so with that, I will talk to you all. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you'll indulge me to talk a little bit first about the 19th, I think it would probably be helpful if we started by just showing a short trailer about our newsroom. And we have been in existence just since the beginning of this year, but I think this trailer will tell you a little bit more of what we're about. So if we could play that really quickly, that'll start our conversation.
Today, women make up more than half of the American electorate and are more engaged than ever in our politics. Yet we remain marginalized in government and elective office.
It's important for women to have a voice in this democracy because we see women being disproportionately affected across our society in so many areas.
The reality is the news industry is already gendered. The 19th is working to level the playing field.
Our newsroom is named for the 19th Amendment, but with an asterisk, the recognition of the omission of certain women from the franchise, from access to the ballot.
We are firm believers that all issues are women's issues. Our readers are people who care about those issues, who care deeply about the intersection of gender, politics, and policy, and want a more nuanced approach to that politics and policy journalism.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th.
With live events and interviews, the 19th is fostering civil conversations and community building that brings our readers into direct contact with the people who represent them.
There's never been a Black woman governor in American history.
I think that our newsroom being as diverse as it is, it means that we're looking and telling stories of women that maybe had not been previously represented in media before.
Our goal is to launch the first newsroom that is truly reflective of the nation's women.
There's more women running now than ever have been before, and people want to be informed.
Because what we know is that women are eager to have conversations about politics and often do not feel like they have a safe space to do that. We want to create that community for women, and we want to create that community for women everywhere.
Newsrooms need to be more inclusive. They need to better reflect their communities. The 19th has the opportunity to do that from the ground floor, and we're not wasting that opportunity.
There's never been a better moment than right now.
The 19th is the newsroom that we've been waiting for.
So that's a little bit about our newsroom. Like I said, like Linnea mentioned, we are named for the 19th Amendment. And let's see here. I'm going to go to the next slide if I can. Yes. Oh, there we go. We launched on January 27th with 5 women whose names and titles you will see below. But since January, we've grown to a pretty diverse staff. We now have nearly 24 people on staff, and our official launch with the debut of our website was on August 2nd. And our website you can see at 19thnews.org. Why the 19th? Just a little bit about the need for this kind of journalism. Women make up more than half of the American electorate and are more engaged than ever in our politics, as you know. Marching on state capitals, voting at higher rates than men, running for local office, and seeking the presidency in record numbers. Yet women remain underrepresented in government and in the nation's executive ranks. Women and gender diverse people are also underrepresented in our politics and policy journalism and in newsroom leadership, which influences what stories are told, how the news is covered, and whose voices are elevated. You may have noticed in our logo that we have an asterisk. That asterisk is because our newsroom is named for the 19th Amendment, but with the recognition that this landmark legislation omitted the Black women who stood shoulder to shoulder with white suffragists. The centennial of suffrage, which we mark this year, presents an opportunity to tell the full story of this history and to honor those who were excluded and erased from this movement. It's also a commitment to and a call to action for the majority of the electorate and to all seeking to fully engage in our democracy. As was mentioned before, what the 19th Amendment says is that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The ratification of the 19th Amendment ignored Native women who would not be recognized even as citizens until 4 years later. And you also had other minorities, including Latinas and Asian Americans, who were excluded through literacy tests and poll taxes. And we know that Black women would have to fight for more than half a century through the civil rights movement until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this is important because it brings to mind really the names of some of the folks that we know were suffragists in their own right, but not people that we tend to talk about on the same plane as like a Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I'm thinking about women like Mary Church Terrell, Mary McLeod Bethune, Ida B. Wells, and then later with the civil rights movement, women like Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, and Septima Clark. So let's bring this into the present day. The reality is that women will factor significantly into the 2020 election because women are the majority, not only of the US population, but also the US workforce and the US electorate. And we know that women are being disproportionately impacted by and responding to the pandemic, and that women are concerned about how to safely participate in this election.
Of particular concern are the marginalized women, older women, poor women, and minorities who could be disenfranchised due to the voter suppression efforts exacerbated by the pandemic. We also know that Black women are the backbone of the Democratic Party and are poised to potentially turn out in the kind of numbers that they did in 2008 and 2012, and that Latinas are also poised to be one of the largest voting blocs for the first time. And this is, just some of the context that we should be thinking about as we think about National Voter Registration Day. So for those of you who are tuned in and who are planning to vote, we want to help you find a vote plan. The first step is making sure that you're registered. The last day to register to vote in the 2020 election in Pennsylvania is October 19th, so that is coming up. And you can register to vote or check your registration status in Pennsylvania by either calling 1-877-VOTES-PA or by visiting the link that's posted here below. You can also request a mail-in or an absentee ballot, and those aren't the same thing. There's some guidance on what the difference is between a mail-in or an absentee ballot at the website that's posted there, but the deadline for applications to be accepted at your county elections office is 5 p.m. on October 27th, so also save that date. You can also find your precinct. As some of you may know, early voting is already underway. It started last Monday in Pennsylvania, and it's going to go through October 27th. And on election day, on November 3rd, the polls are going to be open at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. And you can find your polling location by visiting the link that we have posted here. I should also condition everybody to get used to the idea that we probably are not going to know the results of the election on election night, as traditionally we are used to knowing who the winner of the presidential and other races is on that night. Pennsylvania, along with many other states, is accepting those mail-in ballots after November 3rd, and it varies as far as how many days past Election Day those ballots are going to be accepted. So for those of you tuning in outside of Pennsylvania, make sure that you check and see when the deadline for that is for your particular state.
Great, thank you. So that is a lot of information to take in. Thank you for spelling it out so clearly, especially the how to vote. We are encouraging everyone to, if they want to register to vote and to vote in this year's election. I have some questions for you both, but first I do want to prompt everyone out there, if you have a question, now is a great time to share that, to put it in the Q&A or to look in the Q&A box, and if you see a question you want answered, to upvote it. So I'll let you all do that, and I'll ask Jenny, if I may, given what we've heard from Errin about women's real participation and how much they're turning out to vote, I'm wondering how this tallies with your impression of women in Cassatt's period. I'm wondering, for example, whether her pro-suffrage position was a common one, and if you could sort of contextualize it a bit.
And that of course brings us to Mary Cassatt's family, which they were themselves divided in their attitudes towards suffrage. I think certainly amongst Cassatt circles and her friends and those that she corresponded with, they were all very much in favor of suffrage. But Cassatt herself expressed some concern and a desire to see more women in society kind of embrace their responsibilities and not to rely so much on their fathers or their husbands to make decisions for them. And we, as I mentioned, Cassatt's sister-in-laws both were very strongly in favor of the anti-suffragist movement. That movement I think is a little hard for us to understand today, but they were concerned about women entering politics and felt that women might be a more mediating force in society if they didn't have the vote. So I think Cassatt herself recognized that it was a struggle to get the passage of the 19th Amendment, but she certainly was one of many individuals who played an important, perhaps a secondary role in really helping to change public opinion and to see the passage of the amendment.
And Jenny, you know, it's so important that you point this out, because I do think that you know, how this does kind of relate to present day is just the idea, right, that politics can cause rifts in families, right? And that is something that you know, people have been navigating, you know, for much of our democracy. And, you know, even, you know, going to take a contrary position to others in your family, particularly as a woman, is not something that is new in our politics.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So, you know, obviously we've been sort of telling the story of one woman's contribution to the suffrage movement, Mary Cassatt. Errin, you did mention some other people that you think of, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit about perhaps other individuals from this period whose advocacy kind of resonates with you, who you think of.
Yes, I mean, well, since we are in Philadelphia, I would be remiss if I did not bring up Frances E.W. Harper, who was somebody who was involved with the abolition movement. She was also a poet. She was also a publisher, and she was somebody who was involved in the suffrage movement, and really was somebody who was very outspoken about, you know, the Black suffragists having a role and the need for Black women to also have access to the franchise. And so she is somebody that we don't mention, like I said, alongside some of the more well-known suffragists, but somebody who had a very powerful voice. And if you go back and even listen to some of her speeches and read some of her writings around suffrage at the time, I mean, it's so enlightening, and so much of what she has to say is quite relevant to where we are in our politics today, and really the kind of dynamics about who gets to fully participate in this democracy, and just the concept of allyship in our politics among women.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about allyship. We talk about women so often with women's suffrage, but there were many allies. And so maybe a final question, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A from all of you in the audience. Because it is the centennial of women's suffrage, and that's quite a legacy to be thinking about. Are there any sort of thoughts that this kind of toggling between the historical and today has raised for you? How should we be understanding figures like Mary Cassatt today?
Now, I think in my work on Cassatt and thinking about her in relation to suffrage, I've been struck by how she isn't, as I mentioned, that she's not one of the first names that comes to mind, and rightfully so. I mean, she made a contribution, and we need to see it in perspective of many other individuals. I mean, particularly, you know, Frances Harper, that just mentioned by Errin Haines. But I think it is also a reminder of how one individual who feels determined and feels passionate about a topic can really make a difference. And so I had a renewed respect for how one can activate others in thinking about these causes and bringing them to the forefront of conversations.
Yeah, Errin, do you have any thoughts?
I think Jenny has it exactly right. I mean, again, Mary Cassatt is somebody who used what she had to try to make an impact on suffrage. She was an artist, and she used her art to, you know, to have these depictions of strong women, you know, at a period where that was an ongoing conversation around the role of women in our society in many different areas, voting being one of the most prominent that was emerging at the time that she was doing this work. And so, you know, I think that maybe is the lesson for all of us now, to use what you have to get people engaged in this democracy. Each person, you know, has their own way that they can bring about, you know, the change that they want to see based on the talents and gifts that they have.
Yeah, and that's a great message. And I think we're at a great point in the program. Greg, if you want to, we can open it up to questions if you can tee us up.
Yeah, absolutely. So first I'll say that we received some questions before via email. And I don't know if we'll have time to get to all of them, because I do want to open it up to the Q&A that people have been submitting. But there was one question that came through that I think resonated with a lot of questions that people are asking in the Q&A and the comments. And this is just about other members of Mary Cassatt's family. I guess the first part of this question, and this is from Karen Parsons, would be, was her choice of career embraced by her family? And then I think a lot of people in the comments have been asking about other members of her family who might have disagreed or agreed with her support of suffrage, and perhaps more about her relationship with that sister-in-law that was anti-suffrage. I know that's a lot, but if you have some thoughts to share, Jenny.
Great. No, I'll try to tackle that. Mary Cassatt's family initially supported her career as an artist, or so they supported it when they thought it was a hobby. She encountered some trouble when she approached her later 20s and early 30s, and it became clear that she wasn't going to give up art, and that in order to pursue her art career, she was going to need to spend a great deal of time in Europe. And particularly her father struggled with this and tried to discourage her from being an artist. He wanted to keep all of his children in Pennsylvania and in the Philadelphia area. But Cassatt, even at a young age, was quite stubborn and firm in her beliefs. And so she eventually won out, and her parents moved with her sister, moved to Paris in 1879, and they lived with her for the rest of their lives. And it's amazing to see how much her parents came round to her career. I think her mother was charmed by Duga and a number of the other Impressionists. They followed the sort of politics and the rivalries within the Impressionist circle, and became very, very supportive of her in terms of her exhibitions, and were following the reviews of her artwork very closely. I will just add one note, that her parents, though, were quite firm that they would support her room and board, and they would give her living expenses, but her studio had to pay for itself. So all of her rent, her studio materials, her models, she had to sell her work to essentially meet all of those expenses. And it's the same deal that they gave both of her brothers. So it's very interesting to see how fair they were with each of their children. And I think actually for Cassatt, it was a very good thing that she had to be forced to enter the art world and to make a go of it in terms of making a living off of her artwork. I will say that both of her, on the topic of being anti-suffragists, both of her sister-in-laws supported the anti-suffrage movement. At that moment, Cassatt's two brothers had both passed away. And so in the back of my mind is the sense that had her brothers, who were very supportive of Cassatt, been alive, I wonder if they might have been some kind of mediating influence between the women in the Cassatt family who fell on such different sides on the subject of suffrage. I hope that answers more or less a pretty broad question.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I just want to toss it to Errin. We have some questions that are coming through about where is early voting happening in Philadelphia, and where can you find out more information about the specifically, I'm interpreting that as early voting in person as opposed to mail-in ballots, if I have that right.
Right. So I believe there are about 17 precincts around the city where you can early vote, and you can find out which precinct you are able to go to by, I believe, going to pavotes.org and typing in your address, and then that will tell you which precinct you would need to go to.
Great. And I will put the pavotes.org back in the chat. Just so that's handy for people. We also had another question that was upvoted a number of times, which was Cassatt's, I think this is for you, Jenny, and this is from Sam SSH, was Cassatt's subject of domesticity a consequence of women's limits on public life, their ability to participate during her time, such as things like nightlife and entertainment, which Sam is recognizing as Impressionist subjects, feminism. What year did she get interested in suffrage?
I think that's a very interesting point in that Cassatt, as a female artist, there were certain restrictions that she faced on the subject matter. She couldn't paint at the Moulin Rouge in the way that Toulouse-Lautrec could. She wasn't going to, didn't have access to some of the bars and the nightlife in Paris. I think she might not have seen that as so limiting. I think she might have felt that the world of the home provided her with a great deal of material, and that one could be a modern artist simply by looking at modern life and looking at somewhat ordinary subjects, but subjects that felt very authentic and genuine for the day. It's interesting to me, though, that she was not interested in landscape, and that's, she could have very easily have become a landscape painter, but she was, I think, through and through a subject painter that was really interested in human life and dynamics, particularly, as I've argued, around women. Mary Cassatt became interested, as far as we can tell, in the suffrage about 1907. It's the first time that we see any record of it in her correspondence. She's interested in independence for women, in women pursuing careers, right from the start of her own career in the 1860s. So it's a theme that we see throughout, but the actual sort of concern for the suffrage movement really appears about 1907, and it picks up steam right at the sort of right on the eve of World War I.
Thank you. Another question that's received a bunch of upvotes is, do we know if Mary Cassatt ever voted in the US? If so, what year?
Oh, I love that question, because it fits so nicely into our conversation tonight and into the asterisk that follows the 19th newsroom. Because Mary Cassatt didn't actually win the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, because she was an overseas citizen. And from what I can tell, overseas citizens only received or were protected to receive the rights to have absentee ballots in 1986. So unless she had come back to the US in time for the election, she was unable to vote in her lifetime.
Thank you. Another question that's rising to the top here is, I have read that many male impressionists, Monet, Degas, Renoir, use female models that were prostitutes or consorts, and this often is reflected in some of their expressions. Cassatt subjects are more empowered. Was this kind of difference obvious in the art scene in Paris at the time? How about the general public?
So I'll just, because the question was framed in terms of thinking about models for female artists versus male artists, I'll just say a few words about models that Mary Cassatt used, and that she very often turned to people that she met in her daily life. So some of her models were members of her household. You saw a number of her family members, but she also, children of, we're looking actually at this little girl is a niece of Edgar Duga, so there were people she knew in her life, but she would also hire women who were seamstresses, who she met maybe when she was getting a dress tailored. But she was very concerned about having individuals with whom she felt a connection. She could never paint anyone with whom she didn't have a connection. And so she would often talk about the interesting conversations she would have with her models, and her models were often of a very different class. They were often of working class individuals, and she said that she learned so much through talking to them. So I think while we see a very privileged, a very white world in Cassatt's pictures, I think she was more open than many of her peers to thinking about different individuals and the experience, particularly of women of different classes. So while I wouldn't go so far as to saying she was extraordinarily diverse and advocating for a wide range of others, I think she had her pulse on women's lives in Paris much more so than many of her male colleagues.
I think there's a question that I'm seeing in the comments, and I think this can be directed at either of, or both of you, Errin and Jenny. And I think it relates to what you were just saying quite a bit, Jenny, which is express that the position of suffrage that she represents is one that is representative of her privilege and discounted or not advocate for, or did not advocate for other groups of women. Any comments?
Wait, I feel like I might have missed a bit of, you might have broken up a little bit.
Did I? Okay, I was wondering if I broke up. I got it. Let me read that again. Some of my students expressed the position, or that the position of suffrage that Mary Cassatt represents is one that is representative of her privilege and discounted or did not advocate for other groups of women. Any comments?
Maybe I'll start here, and Errin, you could expand onto that. I think that's building a little bit off of what I was just referring to, and that Cassatt certainly was. She did live in a very comfortable upper middle class environment, and so she certainly is. Many of her colleagues and people like Louisine Havemeyer were from the very wealthiest classes, were also, particularly white, and speaking to, and that was their frame of reference, and that's where we see Cassatt act. That's the sort of arena in which I guess Cassatt is acting. One of the things I've been interested in again, feeding off this notion of the work not quite being done by the passage of the 19th Amendment, is that Louisine Havemeyer, 2 years after the passage of the 19th Amendment, writes to Cassatt that she's going to New Orleans because she's advocating for the work still to be done, that the 19th Amendment was passed, but the laws haven't been written to really open the vote to everyone. And I don't quite know what that means in terms of what Havemeyer was doing, but I think it certainly suggests that there was an awareness on Havemeyer's part and Cassatt's part that the vote, it didn't get to every woman with the 19th, and that there was still much work to be done to ensure that all women could vote.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would add to that is, I think, what we see is Cassatt depicting, a lot of what her reality was, the reality that Jenny was describing. And that was a world of privilege, but also some of the constraints even within that privilege with regard to gender were some of what we see there. But it's interesting you bring up that letter from Louisine because New Orleans, even at that time would have been a fairly diverse place, and so perhaps to your point, she would have been there advocating for women for whom the franchise was not fully extended with the passage of the 19th Amendment. But largely Black women were kind of on their own after 1920, because we know that the white suffragists did largely abandon the movement for suffrage for all women after they got their right to the franchise at that time.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just looking for a question and then I lost it. But I believe the question was, I think I can paraphrase it here. I think someone must have upvoted it. We've seen photos of lots of suffragettes demonstrating and protesting. Do we have corresponding photos of anti-suffragists? Wondering if either of you have the answer to that question.
That's a great question, and I think again we do. I don't think as much work has been done on the anti-suffragists for maybe somewhat obvious reasons. I did find in when I was looking at Cassatt, and particularly looking at what her sister-in-laws were saying, that there were full-page articles in the Philadelphia Inquirer around 1917 or so, advocating against the suffrage movement, and so there are sort of rallies that those women would hold as well. So there is a body of material. I don't know that it's been gathered in quite a systematic fashion. So there's, I would suggest there's probably more work to be done there.
Yeah. We have a number of questions, Jenny, also around, you mentioned this briefly, but I'm wondering if you could expand on the relationship between Degas and Cassatt and maybe some of his views on suffrage.
Well, there have been whole exhibitions devoted to Duga and Cassatt, and their friendship has been the subject of a lot of debate. Neither Duga nor Cassatt saved any of their letters, so they both of them destroyed all of their correspondence at their deaths. So some of it is fully understanding their relationship is a mystery. It's clear when you look at their work that they shared many of the same interests, particularly in formal terms, and the way they painted, their subject matter, their approach. We know that they worked together in making prints, and even we know in a few cases that Duga even came and touched up or made some changes to Cassatt's paintings. Duga was still alive at the time of the 1915 suffrage exhibition. He was quite ill and probably wasn't aware that it was happening. And Cassatt took a little bit of pleasure in thinking about, she thought what he might have thought about his work being used on behalf of the suffrage campaign. He was known for having sometimes derogatory comments against women. He said, particularly of Cassatt, that no woman has the right to draw that well. So that he was really, which is a strange sort of compliment of complimenting her for her ability to draw, but then also saying that she, as a woman, shouldn't be able to do that. So it's, he did have extraordinary respect for her and what she accomplished in an artistic vein, but did carry over a number of much more traditional sort of male views towards women, and was a bit circumspect about women in the art world. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah, do we maybe have time for a couple more questions, Linnea? Two more, great.
Yeah.
I think some questions that are coming through here I've seen a couple are about her relationship to the suffragist movement in France, particularly. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, Jenny.
I've had far less luck. That was a question that occurred to me too. I've not been able to track that as much. Women did not gain the right to vote in France until 1945. So it would take another world war for that enfranchisement of women in France. So much of our material about Cassatt is recorded in American sources, and particularly letters written to her American friends. So there isn't as much material for her activities in France. And so much of it might have just been in conversation with someone coming to tea, and that kind of information just isn't recorded. So I'm at a little bit of a loss in knowing how much she was involved in the French movement.
Yeah, I think maybe one more question, and I'm going to try to combine questions here because I think
Sneak another one in.
I'm going to sneak two in here. The first question is just about Mary Cassatt's success in her lifetime, especially as a woman artist compared to her male peers. But I think there was also a question, and this relates specifically to the suffrage exhibition, which was about that $30,000 price tag. And I'm wondering if that was from admission, whether it was from paintings sold, So that's sort of the micro question, and then the macro question is how successful was she during her lifetime?
Sure. The $30,000, and that's $30,000 in modern terms. So it was raised for just the preview party for the suffrage exhibition, and I think it was a $5 sort of entry fee. So that probably comes out to be somewhere between $50 to $75 in today's terms. Cassatt was actually against raffling off paintings as part of the suffrage exhibition. She felt that it would it would lower the level of the exhibition. So all of the proceeds were just from admission fees. I think it was $1 for the during the run of the exhibition, and I think $5 for the preview party. In Cassatt's lifetime, though, she did see a great deal of success. It took a while, as it did with all of the Impressionists. And initially, their works were simply too radical, too experimental for much of the public. I mentioned a little earlier that Cassatt needed to sell pictures in order to support her studio expenses. And so that meant that she was deeply involved with dealers and with the art market, and kind of selling her work along the way. And that motivated her to exhibit her work and to be seen. And I use that as something of a contrast, because some of her peers, like Gustav Caillebotte or Bert Morisot, didn't sell their work as much, and that had an impact on their reputation in the early 20th century, because their work just wasn't as widely known. But certainly by 1900 and beyond, Cassatt was earning a quite comfortable living based on the sale of her works. Interestingly, most of her works were actually sold to Americans, and so there are very few works by Cassatt in France today. The bulk of them are in US collections, both public and private.
Wow. Well, we are just coming up to time, so I think we will end it here. Errin, Jenny, I really appreciate what you brought to the conversation today. Thank you for being here.
This was lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, and of course, thank you to Greg and to all the people who worked behind the scenes to make this happen. Thank you to all of you who wanted to come to this virtual program tonight. We hope we see you again soon, whether that's at a virtual program or whether that's at the museum. We are open to the public again. A quick reminder, we are new to virtual programs, and when you exit the webinar, you'll be prompted to fill out a survey. Any feedback you have for us is much appreciated. And finally, in addition to tonight's program, the museum is committed to continuing to make sure our audiences have the information they need during this election season. In past years, we've hosted nonpartisan voter registration. This year, we're proud to partner with Plan Your Vote, a 2020 visual arts initiative from vote.org, to connect you all with voter information until Election Day. So we'll be launching that later this week, and please check our website. And with that, I wish you all a very pleasant evening, and thank you to our speakers again for a lovely program.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and don't forget to vote.
Don't forget to vote.
Yeah, thank you. Please vote.